Okay, folks, glad you could make it back again for those who are returning and anybody new. As I always introduce myself, I'm Tony Knopp. I'm the Emeritus Professor of History at UTRGV, and I'm the Vice President of the Brownsville Historical Association. And I'll dig out my notes here because I don't like to make any mistakes. Although I've introduced the ambassador a couple times previously. This is Juan Carlos Coy Vega, who is the Mexican consul here in Brownsville, and it's always a real delight to have him speak to people here in Brownsville. He is, I suppose we were supposed to get questions kind of back and forth, and we will. But I'm going to take advantage of my opportunity to introduce him because he has an impressive resume. He's from Mexico City originally and attended the Universidad Iberoamericana, which is one of the most prominent universities in Mexico. And he has a law degree from there. And let's see, and he completed his diplomatic training at the Matias Romero Institute of Diplomats. You may remember we talked about Matias Romero in this course. He was the representative of the Juarez government up in the United States during the period of war with Maximilian's forces, and served very prominently in that. He has also served in several capacities with the United Nations. He's been Consul General at Dallas and El Paso and at the Mexican Embassy in the United States. And he's been here once before. They're going to keep sending him back till he does it right. He was here in the 1990s as consul to Brownsville, and we were delighted to have him back. And I guess we'll be passing this microphone back and forth. But I think I'd like to start off with giving him a chance to explain what the consul does. Oh, by the way, before I even get into that, let's take a look at your diverse audience here. Canadians, raise your hands. There's several there. Americans, pretty much the rest. We have several people with Mexican heritage. Yes, there's a vote from the back. So quite a very diverse group. We've had even larger audiences most times, but I think we're at the tail end of the winter Texan season, and we're losing some of the people who have already left to go back home. Some of them may have left a little prematurely because it's kind of cold back in some of those places. So let's first of all talk a little bit about the role of the Mexican consulate here in Brownsville for people who may not be acquainted with it. And so I'll let the ambassador tell you about that.
Gracias, Professor. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for the presentation. Yes, I have been lucky enough to be around in the world. I was ambassador of Mexico to Kenya in Africa also, which provided me with another perspective of the world. So the first thing that I would like to do is to distinguish between what an embassy is and what is a consulate. The embassy, roughly we have only one embassy in each country, and they are in the capital city of the country. In our case, we have our main embassy in Washington, D.C., along with other 190 embassies of the other countries. Mexico has also 50 consulates all over the United States. And seeing that we have people from Canada, we have also in Canada, we have in Ottawa, we have in Montreal, we have in Leamington, and we have in Vancouver also. But in the United States, we have 50 consulates, and the consulates work divided on a consular district. In our case, we have our consulate here in Brownsville is only 3 counties, which is Cameron County, Willacy County, and Kennedy County. And the reason for that is because my neighbors are the Mexican consul in McAllen, and he has Hidalgo and Star, and I don't remember which other one. So that's the first difference between the embassy and the consulate. And second, we work by the consular districts. And thirdly, we take care mostly of our Mexican nationals living here in the area. We provide them with passports, Mexican passports, consular IDs, some civil register functions like weddings, like birth certificates, death certificates also. But we have other things to do. We visit prisons where we have our Mexican nationals. And being at the border, of course, we are responsible for making sure that all Mexicans that are coming from inside the United States, deported by ICE or the Border Patrol or CBP, we take them into Mexico and make sure that they arrive safely as long as we can say. So that's roughly what we do. We do a lot of things. Also, we do commercial things, we do cultural things, we have our relationships with universities, with private organizations, with the Chamber of Commerce. So that's what we do. And we have been, the Mexican consulate in Brownsville is the second oldest consulate of Mexico in the United States. The first one is the one in New Orleans, and that's because we used to have ships that go from Veracruz to New Orleans. But the second one is Brownsville, Texas. At the time of the war between Mexico and the United States, when we lost this part, we needed to have a representative here for land, for properties, for rights of our people here. So that's the way we started. So we have a historical place. Our consulate is a historical one because we have 170 years already here in Brownsville, Texas. In fact, we're working very much with the oldest consulate of the United States, which is in Matamoros, and they are 160 years old. So we're very good friends with the current consul there, and she's leaving, by the way, next June. She's going back to Washington, she told me. But anyway, and we members of the Foreign Service are rotated all over the world. I have been lucky enough to be twice here in Brownsville. Back in 1994 was my first time here. So I've been 35 years in the Mexican Foreign Service. Wow. That's quite a life. Yes. So I hope to retire here in Brownsville, maybe.
We've been fortunate, and perhaps it's not just Brownsville, but the quality of the Mexican representatives here has been very, very high. You look at the resume of this consul and the previous one, and a number of them have been extraordinary people in terms of education and background and experience and so on. And we're glad they wind up here. In terms of issues, I recall the previous consul saying, well, I had to go down to the bridge this morning because there was an incident down there. Do you run into things like that?
Yes. Unfortunately, because of my physical situation, I will not be running. but yes, we have a staff of about 25 people that is taking care. We have an office at the Puente Nuevo, the Gateway Bridge. And that office has the purpose of that office is twofold. One being that there's a lot of people that cannot cross into the United States. So they can reach our people there and say, listen, I need to find if my relative is somewhere in the United States, if he's in a prison, if he's in a hospital. You know, it's quite difficult. Or sometimes people that are beneficiaries of money, pensions, that checks that Mexicans are able to send, they cannot come to the United States, so we deliver that to them. And also we have a lot of incidents, as Professor was saying, people can, at the river they get drowned, many incidents. We have had also some incidents with people that cannot cross, or when they are detained by the authorities of the United States when they are trying to cross illegally, when they are trying to cross drugs or whatever other situations. So yes, we have to work at the bridges a lot.
I have on here my list of things. Another role of the consulate apparently has to do with communities and health. Maybe you can address that a little bit.
Yes, Professor. We have the department that is called the Institute for the Mexicans Abroad, and that is organized in what we call the ventanillas, or windows. We have three different type of windows. One is health, financial education, and education in general. And we work mainly with organizations that are already settled in this area, that are known for working with the community. With the issue of health, we have some agreements with other institutions so that we can have a, let's say, like a truck going around, taking blood pressure tests, diabetes, eye, and some dental issues also. So what we need is to inform our community that they need to be healthy. That's one issue. The other thing is we need to teach our people how to use the money. That's why we have a financial window for educating them how to open an account, how to pay their taxes, how to send money to Mexico without being so expensive as it used to be in the past. And many other things, but mainly teaching them how to handle their money for the rest of their lives, to build up credit history and so on. And on the other issue, education in general, we have a lot of people that left Mexico without finishing their basic education. So we provide them with studies that they can finish the elementary school that they started in Mexico. They can finish it in here by online, let's say online, and they will get a certificate from Mexico that will be just an achievement for them, so that they can read, they can write, and they can express themselves better. So we have a lot of work with the community. Of course, certainly, our office has 5 areas. One being documents, which I already explained at the beginning. Then we have protection of Mexican citizens abroad. That means taking care of their rights. Being, we see immigration issues, labor issues, criminal law, and domestic violence, basically. And then we have this Institute for the Mexicans Abroad, which has a lot of programs. Certainly not only this program, but we have a lot of them involving kids, for example, trying to make kids understand that if they were born in Mexico or if they were born in here, how to go about integrating themselves into the society. That is a very important thing for us, so that they learn how to live in society in the United States. And then we have the Cultural and Economic Department and Tourism Department, which is headed by Diana, by the way. And so we work with the Chamber of Commerce. We have also promoting tourism. And in the education side, we have this relationship with the university and some other organizations. And then we have all the administration of the office. So that's what we have in the office. But regarding again the communities abroad, that's what we do. We approach them very often. We go to the places where they are. We are not waiting for them to come to the office. We go to them and provide the services.
I think it's interesting the extent of the outreach that the Mexican government makes to its people who are living here. You know, for the gringos, and you go into another country, you're pretty much on your own. They'll help you if you get in trouble, but they're not reaching out really to education and those kind of aspects. So it's, and I think it's important because they're going to be living here, and you know, we want them to become effective and competent people in our country. Excuse my neglect in introducing Diana Gonzalez, who is in charge of Asuntos Culturales and Turismo at the consulate. Has been working there a number of years and has been a great help to me, I know, in trying to do things with regard to Mexico and with regard to the consulate. Diana revealed to me that occasionally you tell a story or two about your adventures dealing with foreign parties. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a couple of those with us, appreciate it.
Well, I can choose talking about my stay in Africa. That was an interesting one. And I got the opportunity from my bosses in Mexico in a very funny way. I was riding in an elevator in Mexico City at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I met with one of the undersecretaries, and she told me, I'm looking for an ambassador to Kenya, do you want to go? So I said, yes, I want to go. Let me ask my family and I will answer you. So I went back home and I told my kids, at the time they were 17, 14, 16 and then 17. And they said, yes, we congratulate you, have a nice trip. but I spent 3 very useful and enrichment, that was enrichment for my life to be in Africa, because I came to the point in which I was able to compare Mexico with Kenya. And my final conclusion was that Kenya is, as of today, about the way Mexico was 40 years ago. So that means a lot of problems, a lot of lack of infrastructure, corruption, of course, more than the one that we already have, and many other problems, social problems. No? Being the great difference that in Kenya everything is tribal. No? They work by tribes, the Kikuyos, and so on. No? About my job, it was very interesting because I had the chance to work with international affairs. As you know, in Nairobi, they have 2 offices depending of the United Nations, one being the environmental program, and the other one the human settlements programs. And I was the permanent representative of Mexico in those organizations. And it was interesting to see how the world is working toward finding solutions to those 2 big problems. Environment, which is a huge problem all over the world, human settlements. How do you grow society with justice, with equality, with equal opportunities for each one? In Nairobi, there is one of the biggest, I don't know how to say those, perdida, well, a big slum, a big slum that is one of the biggest slums in the world. And it's incredible what is there. In one,
It's interesting, the words in Spanish, Ciudad Perdida,
yeah,
the lost city.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's
And so that was also very shocking for me to see how we did have in the past that in Mexico. Now we are a little better, but those big cities, lost cities, as I say, are still there, and the people is suffering. And really, it was shocking for me to see the difference between how nations can change in a certain time. So that is one of my very best experiences in the Foreign Service, and I had a chance also to visit Rwanda, which is a country, that's what we call our concurrencies. I was settled in Nairobi, but I was covering 7 other countries in Africa, one of them being Rwanda. And Rwanda, as you know, after the genocide, is very interesting. They have recovered because they have had a very effective leader, which is Paul Kagame. And he was he is still a leader, he's still the president of Rwanda. And he, at some point, they will have to change him because otherwise he become a dictator. No? Mm-hmm. He's been there already since 1994, so that's a lot of time. No? And so 26 years. So that's an interesting thing to see, Rwanda. And finally, I visited the mountains. I visited the gorillas, and that was a fantastic. That was a trip of my life. And I was with my kid. My kid was by then 16, 17 years old. And when we came back from the mountains, he said, "I have no doubt that the gorillas are our fathers." So I said, well, not exactly, but so those are one of the things interesting in my life.
How long were you there?
3 years.
10?
3.
Oh,
3 years. Thank you. Let's see, what else do I want to bring up here? Well, a few questions about Mexican history. Now, I tried to give him advance warning, so these are kind of general questions, but we haven't looked at the recent period in Mexican history yet. We will look at that next week as our last session. We're up really into the period of the end of the revolution in 1940 at this point. So they may not know much about any of the more recent developments. But in terms of leadership in Mexico, and all too often I find myself talking about the history in terms of presidents. But in Mexico, presidents have been very important, dominant figures in many cases. So I think it's entirely appropriate. But looking at it from that perspective, who do you see as in past, Mexico's past, as an outstanding leader, and who would you consider as a very negative figure?
Well, that's a difficult question. But if I have to answer the first one, who is, in my view, one of the past presidents or Mexican presidents in the past important, and who was definitely definitely important in the change of Mexico was Benito Juarez. For me, was Benito Juarez. He was able to bring some different ideas, to bring some different law in Mexico. I think it was very important to divide the power of God and the power of the land, so that everyone has its own competence, no? And that was an important change in Mexico, because that was the way in which the civil society was able to develop without the influence and without the manipulation of the Catholic Church. At that time, I'm talking about that time. So what I think is Benito Juarez was a very important one. Now, negative presidents, I don't know, each one of them was able to have their moment. No? That's what I can say. I mean, if you think on the Mexican Revolution, I can say, for example, the time of Porfirio Diaz. For many people in Mexico, that was the most strongest moment of Mexico. And I can think of that. It was a time in which the Mexican Railroad was built, in which there was a strong hand being able to control the country. But that was a country of 15 million people by then. And but now we are 130 million. So it's a different country. So that's why I say, if I take the latest presidents, I can tell you who I do not believe was a good president. No? But I wouldn't do that.
That's the difference, Consul. I will.
Well, if you consider that I have been 35 years in the Foreign Service, I have worked with six different presidents, starting with Miguel de la Madrid, Carlos Salinas, Ernesto Zedillo, Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón, Enrique Peña Nieto, and now this López Obrador, better known as AMLO. All of them have provided different views of Mexico. And in terms of my job, which is foreign service, I would say that Mexico has had a pretty good image on the other countries, except in one period when we started with the big issues of drug trafficking, crime, organized crime, and corruption.
Let me check here what I have.
What am I going to say?
Very political.
Now, this is something that I think about every once in a while. For example, with the United States, the violence of, for example, the American Civil War. Now, it did end slavery, so that's an important factor. But can anything like that be worth the cost of millions of lives? And that's why I raise the same question for you with regard to the Mexican Revolution. So worth the cost?
Well, yes. There's, I would look at numbers first, so that I can try to help to understand. As we were saying, at the time of the Mexican Revolution, there were, in 1910, Mexico used to have about 15 million people. When the 15. So when the revolution ended, Mexico had 14 million. So that's 1 million less. That's why people say that during the Mexican Revolution, 1 million people died. But let's look at it in different ways. Not all of them died because of the revolution. One. Second, at that time there were a lot of diseases like the one that we are having now, because but it was not the coronavirus, maybe it was the cantivirus or something. And people died also for that. And one important thing is that during that time, people wasn't born because people was busy on the war. So, on that side, what I would say is, I don't think that Mexico lost 1 million people during the revolution. I think that it was much more or less due to the war. Maybe it was, as I said, diseases and other things, many factors. But let's say 100,000 people really was the people that was lost during the revolution. That's my view. Now, was it worth it? Yes, because that was the beginning of the new Mexico. Somehow we needed to have different society. Some people, maybe the people that died with ideas, or they were criminals, or they were members of the army. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I think that every time that a country like Mexico has a new beginning, it's even if people was lost, it is worth it, because we need to have a new direction on our country. That's what I think. I don't know if that satisfies anyone.
Often our judgments don't necessarily satisfy everybody. I can certainly make a comment with regard to that. I know that if 1 million people somehow disappeared from Mexico, some of them came here. Some went to Guatemala, but probably not very many. But this was the first big, I would say, migration of peones into the United States. We had, particularly San Antonio and other places, picked up a fair population of, in many cases, educated and fairly well-off people who were fleeing the problems in Mexico at that time. And I mentioned this before to this group, at least briefly. I think that Alvaro Obregón provided a tremendous service to Mexico by consolidating the revolution in 1920 and brought an end to the threats of massive violence, although the violence continued from time to time. There were some more uprisings, but he represented the kind of consolidation that made it possible in the longer term for Mexico to move ahead. Let's see what else I have on my list here. What is the attitude that Mexicans have, in your opinion, about their history? Do they have a sense of pride? Is there a sense of resentment? Is it towards the people who were their leaders? What's the kind of feeling that they have about their history?
Well, I would say that there are certain educated people that is familiar with Mexican history, that really that know the history, and because they know the history, they are able to have a better understanding of the relationship with other countries, especially with the United States, which is by far our best known history for Mexico. But I would say that unfortunately the new generations in Mexico are not familiar with the history. So they don't have a particular idea of what is going on, and they are acting more on what is said by the majority of the people. It's sad not knowing our history, because if you do not know the history, you commit the same mistakes again. That's my feeling. That's personally, if you make the same mistakes, if you don't know your past, you make the same mistakes. No? But that happens with the history. And unfortunately, I feel that people in Mexico, the young people, the so-called millennials, they are not familiar with that. I don't know if that is happening in the US, but in Mexico, that is happening. You can ask people about Benito Juárez, you can ask people about Porfirio Díaz, you can ask Victoriano Huerta, Álvaro Obregón, Lázaro Cárdenas, and they don't know anything about that. And that's sad. Now, regarding the United States, I would always say that Mexico has this mixed feeling about our relationship, about the history of our relationship. And the mixed feelings are, most of Mexicans would like to be like the United States. They would like to have all the things that you can reach and get in the United States. But at the same time, there is this misconception that, oh no, the gringos, they attack us, they took the half of our territory. No? This is the common feeling. And at the same time, people want to be in America. it's a dual feeling that they have. No? We all have that feeling. I mean, sometimes it makes, I have been around in the United States for most of my foreign service career. I mean, I've been in Dallas, in El Paso, in Brownsville, in Washington, so in North Carolina. So for me, it's very familiar to be here and to understand that. I feel that after so many times I have come to understand Americans, thinking that everything in America is local politics. No? That's an important thing, that the difference between Mexico and the United States. In Mexico, we still have the powerful president that will answer all the questions, that will provide all the answers to every problem in Mexico. And here, no, you have to talk to the city manager, and that's it. So that's the big difference between our countries. Now, to answer your question regarding history, again, I feel that unfortunately in Mexico we are losing the knowledge of our history, and that is going to be, it's going to have its consequences in politics, in economics, in all the society.
There's a little sheet that I used to hand out, I wish I'd brought it along now, to my students, called Disney Max Un Breve Historia. And what it was is a compilation of questions that were asked of elementary, junior high students in Mexico about their history. And they put together kind of a comical story, you know, because it's so distorted and wrong, and exactly confirming what you're talking about, that people don't know. We do it about the United States, about our knowledge of our history and what the students know in the U.S., and you're confirming that the problem is more universal than just the United States. Part of our problem here in the U.S., I think, is that there's history offerings have dropped off considerably, particularly in the college level. Mm-hmm. They don't want to offer or require, or even less, American history. So Americans are less knowledgeable about their history than perhaps ever before. And often, sometimes, the rather sad way in which history is taught. I can remember my expensive military school that I attended as a high school student, that the teacher would come in and say, open to the end of the chapter and do the who, what, and whys. There were terms, it was called who, what, and why, and there were terms there, and what we were supposed to do was just look them up in a book and write them down. Mm-hmm. You know, and apparently that was supposed to be teaching. Well, you know, yeah. Pretty sad. There were other teachers at the same institution that were very good, you know, but I happen to have one that wasn't. And I'm afraid that oftentimes the history teaching is pretty weak in our public schools as well, because I don't like to feel I'm blaming it on the coaches. The coaches are often the history teachers. And where is the focus of the coach? Well, it's on the coaching, not on the history stuff. And so we share the problem of losing our historical perspective, I think, as well.
If I may add something, I think that the technology and cyber information that you have now has made very easy for the guys to answer questions about history. Because if they are asked, tell me who did so, did who's and why, so they will go to Google and find everything, and that's it. No, nobody will, after that, nobody will investigate anything. I answer, see you tomorrow.
And you may be getting your information from a wide variety of sources that are not necessarily reliable, dependable, or accurate. And certainly that's a difficulty. Question?
Yes. What level of education do you think in Mexico would be suffice enough to actually have a well-rounded idea of Mexican history?
Well, I think definitely that you need to start in what we call escuela primaria, which is elementary school. From there to when you finish your high school in Mexico, you are going to get everything. At least in my case, I remember I used to study 6 years of primary school, 3 of high school, 3 of secondary school, and then 3 of high school. And during that time, I was able to know history of Mexico, universal history, geography, for example. Nobody knows where is, So to answer your question, yes, I think that between primaria and preparatoria, the primary and high school, then you will be able to.
I think perhaps the issue is that the highest education level reached by Mexicans tends to be a lot less than what we desire.
Yes, yes. But it's a funny thing because, for example, we have very good investigators in Mexico. In fact, I was reading this morning that they are finding I don't know what thing about the coronavirus, and the group is a Mexican group. That is finding, they went to China, and they were able to follow the chain of something about the genome. You call that?
Yes.
Yeah. But and that was a group of Mexicans. We have, many years ago, the inventor of the color TV was a Mexican, and so on. But it's sporadic and individuals, not a group, not as a group. We're not working as a group, and that's a big problem. That's why we just recently had here in Brownsville the Charro Days, and we had Julio Cesar Chavez, the great boxer of Mexico. That means that in Mexico, really, in Mexico, we are individuals. If you want to work, and if you want to be someone, you have to work by yourself.
Right.
So that's why our soccer team is not a very good soccer team. We cannot work in group, we're individuals. So that's what is happening in history also.
And it's reflected in history in the way that the revolution was kind of, it's all individuals.
Absolutely, I agree.
Which was partly certainly explained by El Laberinto de la Soledad. Octavio Paz, one of the great writers, I'll talk about him next week a little bit, one of the great writers of Mexican, and his book, The Labyrinth of Solitude, emphasizes the individualism of Mexicans. Yeah.
We can look at it.
Doc?
I wanted to ask you, I've heard several people resent from Mexico, the fact that this used to be Mexico, do you come across that and people still irritated by it?
I think that there's very few people that already feels that like that. In the past, yes, there was a lot of people. Even there is a very good book that is called Propiedad Ajena, for foreign property or the property of the others. I don't know how to say that in English. And it has to do with that. People coming from Coahuila to Texas to recover that land that was lost at the time of the war or so on. Yeah, but not anymore because of what I was saying. I mean, kids do not know about what happened in the past. When you see the map of what Mexico lost, you see, yes, we lost it, but now we have to ask, what if we had that?
There are some people who think that there is a reconquista that's going on right now as a result of numbers of Mexicanos that are crossing.
I don't really think that it's a reconquista, because when people leave, when they leave Mexico, they are planning to come to live. Many, few of them are planning to go back, no? Now, because it's so difficult to go to Mexico and come back because of many things that are happening here. You were going to ask something?
Yes, it's interesting. I am from Ontario and live quite close to Leamington, and so we have a lot of migrant Mexican workers there in the summer. And I'm wondering what the difference, because being here in Texas 12 years on the border in Brownsville, I have friends that came from migrant families that are now doctors and professionals and whatever. How does that work to get their papers to become citizens in Canada compared to the United States?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think that, first of all, Mexico and Canada have a program, a 40-year-old program, by which Mexico is sending workers to Canada. In fact, at one time I was able to handle that program. We used to have agreements with the growers in the Ontario area, and yes, that people going in the program, they went and came back to Mexico. They went for the picking up the growth,
Just for the season.
the season, and coming back. And the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Mexican Ministry of Labor provided them with the proper documents in agreement with Canada, and they were able, but not migrate indefinitely. That was one thing. The second wave of Mexicans was a lot of people applying for asylum in Canada. And that became a big issue between Canada and Mexico, because most of those people were applying without really having a real cost to apply for asylum. But the goodwill of the government of Canada was issuing the asylum to Mexicans. Many of them are already there, but they had to stop that policy, and that's why Canada started to put the visa requirement for Mexicans to go to Canada, which created a lot of problems between our countries. But finally, the new government of your country decided to eliminate the visa, and now we are able to go. What is going to happen in the past, in the future? I think that if the immigration policy in this country, in the United States, continues to be as hard as it has been for many people, people will go to Canada. And of course they will have to comply with it. It's difficult because they have to go all over the United States.
But we have open doors.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I
Exactly.
think it was 285,000 they took in last year, and on the list of the people that they brought in, they didn't list Mexico, which really surprised me. It was like Indian, Africa,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
and yet I didn't see at all the Mexican. And I wondered about that as well. Why,
Yeah.
you know, when they're.
And I think because the tradition has been migrating to the United States, not to Canada. not to any other country. But at some point in the future, they will apply for work. Yeah.
But if they're seasonal workers, they're best of both
Well,
worlds.
they
can
will
work in
still
Ontario in
go,
the summer
as
and
long-
back and back.
As long as we have the program, which has been very successful one. In my view, that's something that we have to have with the United States.
Yes.
But instead of having a huge program, maybe we need to work with each American state having the same program. But,
Thank you.
Well, one of the,
I'm sorry.
The one,
we'll get-
okay.
Well, maybe one of the problems is the perception that Mexicans may have of Canada, that they have an open door, but it's a refrigerator door.
Right, exactly. But actually, Leamington is on the same actually latitude as San Francisco. So it's very warm, Leamington, where we work. It's a long growing season. Beautiful, really.
We have a consul in Leamington.
Yes, I could have to go and visit.
The question about,
Do you think that the immigration policies and the way Americans treat Mexicans, as far as the government's concerned, is equitable and fair in comparison to how we treat Canada? We're not putting a wall on the Canadian border, and we treat Canadians differently than we treat Mexicans down here.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem fair to me, and it seems discriminatory. And what is the consulate's view of that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a very complicated issue, but to answer your question, yes, there is a difference between the treatment that Canadians and Mexicans receive when applying for their visas to come to the United States, be it as tourists or be it as professionals. They have a different treatment. Why? Because the United States has its own policies. We have to be respectful of them because we cannot ask for them to change that. But what we can do is to ask for Mexicans to comply with all the requirements that now, if you look at it from the point of view of equality or justice, I think that sometimes we haven't been able to explain all the benefits that Mexican migration has brought to the United States. We haven't been able to explain that.
a little perhaps historical background on that, discussing the reason that we have so many who have come up here and stayed rather than going back and forth. Well, we had a system where they could come and go back, the Brownsville program, which the United States ended. But already you'd established a pattern then of Mexicans being able to come up and work, so then that's when I would say the largest aspect of illegal immigration began to really take off at that point. There's still some farm labor that we have moving back and forth today, but the closing off of the Brownsville program, rather than enhancing it, I think is what created the desire for Mexicans to, well, from their perspective, the necessity of staying in the United States because you couldn't really go back and then expect to get back in. And that was a big part of the problem.
It became expensive.
Yeah, expensive to have to do that back and forth.
We have to use the coyotes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well.
It became a big issue. Well, I think we've kind of run the course for our hour today, and I want to express my gratitude to Consul and Ambassador Cueveda for coming to us, and the Mexican consulate has always been most cooperative, and we appreciate their perspective and their help in educating people about U.S. relations with Mexico and about Mexican history. So thank you for coming.